Saving Sweetness. Out in the hottest, dustiest part of town is an orphanage run by a female person, nasty enough to scare night and day. She goes by the name of Mrs. Sump, though I doubt there ever was a Mr. Sump, on account of she looks like something the cat drug in and the dog wouldn't eat. I heard that Mrs. Sump doesn't much like seeing the orphans resting or having any fun, so she puts them to scrubbing the floor with toothbrushes. Even the ittiest, bittiest orphan, little Sweetness. So one day, Sweetness hit the road. I found out right away because Mrs. Sump came busting into Loopy Lil's room, hollering like a banshee. "Sheriff," she yelled. That's me. "That provoking little twerp, that dear little child Sweetness, done escaped, disappeared. And I'm fit to be tied, worrying about the poor thing, all pink and helpless and wandering lost in the plains and stepping on scorpions and falling into holes and such. You gotta bring her back alive, safe, before she runs into Coyote Pete." That did it. Scorpions were one thing, but Coyote Pete is as mean as an acre of rattlesnakes, and the toughest, ugliest desperado in the West. So I got my star and buckled my gun belt and headed west. It was hot as blazes. Seemed like the wind was too tired to blow. Then it got hotter. Hours passed, and what with the sun beating down on me, I commenced to feeling thirsty. That was when I realized it would have been prudent to bring along some water. After some more hours, I begun to stagger with thirst, and the next thing I knowed, I was plopping down in the dirt. Fortunately, I was in the shade of a big cactus, a saguaro, so I decided to stay there for a spell and catch my breath. It's the hero of the story. Next thing I knew, I felt this cool, delicious water trickling over my tongue. I popped open my eyes, and there, just a shadow against the sun, was little Sweetness and her big canteen. As soon as I was watered up enough to make words come out of my mouth, I said, "Why, Sweetness, thank heaven I've saved you." She said, "Yes, sir, thank you. That little orphan's just cute as a speckled pup under a wagon." "Now I've come to take you home," says I. "I don't want to go home," says she. "I'm tired of scrubbing floors with a toothbrush." "What can't be cured must be endured," I told her. Now I thought this was very wise advice, but the orphan didn't seem to think so, because she lit off like she was trying to catch yesterday. This was going from bad to worse. Now I was going to have to save that orphan again. Also, if you don't know anything about the desert, you know that when the sun goes down, in all its glory, it starts to cool off, and then it gets right cold. Also, the snakes come out. So I headed off after Sweetness, all shivering and wishing I'd brought a blanket. I got to feeling a trifle hungry, too. Seems like I was wandering around among the snakes and the rocks for a coon's age, till I was tuckered out, so I just curled up against a bush and went to sleep. Pretty soon I commenced to dream that I was home with my own dear mama, sitting round the fire all toasty warm, and she was cooking something nice. Then I woke up and there was an orphan and a campfire. And that little tyke was a toast and marshmallows. "Want one?" says she. Well, doesn't that just beat all? "Now looky here, Sweetness," I says to her while I was gobbling down them marshmallows. "This is the second time I done saved you." "This is the second time I done saved you, and I'd very much appreciate it if you'd stay saved. So we're going to mosey on back to that orphanage right now." Well, I'd be darned if she didn't start to cry. "Don't you like me?" she asked. "Why, sure I do, honey. And I saved you twice. There's nothing to cry about." But she went right on bawling. "I ain't got no ma," she says. "I ain't got no pa. All I got's Miss Sump and a toothbrush." Well, ain't no way to fix that lesson. What? Ain't no way to fix that lesson you gets adopted, I explained. Then she smiled up at my face like she was expecting me to say something particular. It was too deep for me. It sure is a dilemma, was all I could come up with to say. At which she throwed up her little hands in the air and stomps off into the night. Dang, says I. Now you quit that. You really fry my patience. But I was going to bring that orphan back if it if it hair-lipped the governor. So there was the sun rising over the plains, and there was I feeling like something that was chewed up and spit out, trying to find a little orphan out in the big wild west. Now here comes the exciting part. I had gone far enough to work up a good sweat, so I ambled over to a big rock so as I could stand in the shade. That's when I heard the sound, just a little click, like a gun being cocked. I turned around, and what I see but Coyote Pete, loaded for bear, and giving me a look that would freeze a cat. I had to think fast. Coyote Pete, I told him, you can see by the star on my chest that I is here to uphold the law. Now, you can't go around shooting folks and scaring orphans, and I's here to arrest you. Now, it don't seem like he heard what I said, 'cause just as cool as you please, he aimed the 6-shooter right at my big silver star. Listen here, hamster brains, I says. You're riding for a fall. You put down that there gun, or I'm gonna knock you into the middle of next week. I'm gonna snatch you bald-headed. I'm gonna lock you up and throw away the key. And you know what he done? He made a sound like thunk and fell over backwards, laid out cold like a sack of feed. I scared him that bad. And who should show up just then but Sweetness? She took off her hair ribbons, and we tied that varmint up bulletproof and pig tight. Now, Sweetness, I told her, I ain't having no more of this running away. You can't go roaming around in the prairie with outlaws all over the place. It's too dangerous. How many times I gotta save you? If you were as smart as you is brave, you could figure out how to save me for good, she said, looking at me right in the eye. There we stood, having a kind of staring contest. What you leading up to, I says. Think, says she. So I chewed on it a while longer. Do it have something to do with adopting? You're getting to it, she says. I was starting to get a kind of pretty picture in my head regarding me and little Sweetness and a couple of rocking chairs by the fire. Well, sweet child, I says to her, I knows I's a rough character, but if you was to agree to it, I could adopt you. Pa, says she, and she fell on me like grandma on a chicken snake. On a chicken snake. Okay, that must be a thing. Then me and Sweetness rolled that varmint all the way back to town. Now here come the ending. That very day I done signed them adoption papers. Then that precious child told me about the 7 other orphans and how their toothbrushes was worn down to little nubs with all that scrubbing, so I adopted them too. As for Coyote Pete, we put him in jail, and I got a big reward for bringing that varmint to justice. After a few years, they let him out and put him in the custody of a parole officer. This was none other than Mrs. Sump, who, as we can see, was out of the orphan business. And I don't know how she done it, but she got that desperado to marry her, and now all he does is scrub the floor, and I can tell you, he jumps when she hollers frog. And that's the truth.